The air smelled like gasoline and death. 122 degrees in the shade. No shade for miles. Sarah Mitchell stumbled into the pool of yellow light cast by the flickering open sign, her bare feet leaving dark prints on sun-cracked concrete. Each step carved fresh agony through the hamburger meat. Her soles had become 8 miles of desert gravel, embedded deep skin peeled back in strips, nerve endings, screaming protests her throat couldn't voice anymore. The flannel shirt hung loose from her shoulders, torn across the right side where fabric gave way to reveal something worse than the bullet graze bleeding through makeshift bandages. Her eyes held the vacancy of someone who'd seen the floor of hell and couldn't find the ladder back up. 2:47 in the morning. Route 66 stretching empty in both directions, a ribbon of asphalt bleeding into darkness. The gas station squatted alone in the vastness, last outpost before 30 miles of nothing. Pumps dormant. Building dark except for that stuttering sign and one fluorescent tube buzzing inside the convenience store window. Sarah's knees hit concrete. The impact sent shockwaves through bones that had absorbed too many impacts already. She pressed both palms flat against the ground, feeling grit bite into cuts that hadn't healed. Wouldn't heal would carry infection if she lived long enough for that to matter. Her lungs pulled desert air that tasted like copper and dust and the particular flavor of absolute desperation. The words came out as a whisper addressed to no one, to the universe, to whatever waited in the darkness beyond the light. Just kill me fast this time. Her voice carried the texture of sandpaper on raw wood, hoarse from screaming that had happened so long ago her vocal cords barely remembered how to form syllables. The request held no drama, no performance. Simple transaction. Mercy for the damned. The rumble started low. Distance made it gentle at first, almost soothing, the kind of sound that vibrated in your chest before your ears registered it. Thunder without clouds. Predators approaching. Sarah's head jerked up, every muscle tense despite exhaustion that made her bones feel hollow. Her body knew that sound. 2 years of conditioning had taught her motorcycles meant ravens. Ravens meant pain, meant things that made death look like kindness. She tried to stand. Failed. Tried again. Managed to get knees under her, then feet swaying like a tent pole in high wind. The convenience store beckoned 15 feet that might as well have been 15 miles. She took one step. Another. The third step brought darkness swimming across her vision, legs deciding independently that they'd carried her far enough. The leather and motor oil smell hit first. Worn soft by 4 decades of riding, the scent carried memory and ritual, and the particular perfume of a life lived on 2 wheels. 7 Harley-Davidson motorcycles materialized from the dark formation, tight and military-precise headlights, cutting parallel beams through dust that hung suspended in still air. The lead bike was a 2003 Road King matte black paint job dulled by desert sand and hard miles. The engine ticked down from its rumble to a purr. Then silence as the rider killed the ignition. He kicked the stand down, not parked, you don't park a Harley, and let the 1450cc Evolution motor begin its cool-down symphony of metallic pings and clicks. Marcus Reeves swung his leg over the seat with the economy of motion that comes from repeating an action 10,000 times. 62 years old, 6'1", 195 pounds of wire and sinew wrapped in leather that had molded itself to his frame. Gray hair fell to his shoulders, pulled back in a tie that had seen better decades. His beard carried the same salt and pepper mix, trimmed close enough to be deliberate, wild enough to be honest. The scar running from his left temple to jaw told its own story. Shrapnel, Beirut, 1983, Marine Corps. Purple rope of tissue that ached when storms came and ached when they didn't, and had ached every day for 34 years, regardless of weather. His eyes, gray-blue like winter sky over open ocean, had seen too much and forgotten nothing, and carried the weight of both burdens without complaint. The 6 riders behind him followed the same ritual stands down engines, cooling, dismounting in synchronized silence that spoke to years of riding together. Not a gang, a brotherhood. The distinction mattered. Sarah watched them form a semicircle, blocking her escape routes without seeming to positioning themselves between her and the darkness she'd run from. Her back hit the convenience store wall, nowhere left to go. The fluorescent tube above cast harsh shadows across faces that looked carved from different grades of stone. Marcus approached slowly, hands visible, palms open. 20 feet, 15, 10. Each step measured telegraph designed to communicate the opposite of threat. Sarah's body didn't believe it. 2 years of conditioning said men in leather meant specific things, and none of those things involved gentleness. She slid down the wall knees, pulling to chest arms wrapping around shins, making herself as small as physics allowed. The words came out, automatic script, memorized through repetition until it lived in muscle memory rather than thought. Do whatever you want. Just make it quick. Please. Marcus stopped at 5 feet. Then he did something that short-circuited every expectation Sarah's trauma had built. He knelt. 6'1" of weathered Marine got down on one knee, then the other, settling his weight until his eyes were level with hers. Made himself small, made himself approachable. Extended every nonverbal signal in the human repertoire that said, I am not a threat. His voice came out gentle, textured with years of cigarettes and whiskey and hard roads, but gentle. Nobody's killing anybody tonight. Sarah's eyes searched his face for the lie, for the angle, for the inevitable violence that always followed promises. Found nothing but steady presence and something else, something that looked like the kind of sadness that had settled into bone marrow and set up permanent residence. You don't understand. When they find me, they won't. Marcus's tone carried absolute certainty, the kind that comes from facing down worse threats than whatever had Sarah running barefoot through desert. Because they'll have to go through me first. And darling, I've been shot at by professionals. One of the riders stepped forward, 58 years old, lean and weathered hands that trembled slightly even when held still. Tommy Harrison, doc to everyone who knew him. Vietnam 101st Airborne Combat Medic, who'd stitched up more soldiers than he could count and lost more than he could forget. The med kit hanging from his shoulder looked like a natural extension of his body carried so long it might as well have been surgically attached. His voice matched his hands, quiet, steady, despite the tremor, professional. Ma'am, I need to check that wound on your side. Looks like a bullet graze, and if it's been more than a few hours, infection's already setting in. Sarah flinched back, arms tightening around her knees. Doc stopped reading her body language the way he'd learned to read vital signs. Quick assessment, immediate adjustment. Marcus spoke without looking away from Sarah's eyes. Doc saved my life in '83. Pulled me out of a building that was more rubble than structure, patched me up while mortars fell like rain. He's good people. Best medic I've ever known, and I've known plenty. The words held weight because they held truth. Sarah's grip on her knees loosened a fraction. Not trust. Not yet. But maybe the first crack in the wall that trauma had built. My gunnery sergeant in Beirut, man named Collins, used to say fear and courage aren't opposites. Courage is fear that decided to move anyway. Marcus gestured to the desert behind them, to the 8 miles Sarah had covered on shredded feet. You ran 8 miles through country that kills people who are prepared and equipped. You did it barefoot, bleeding, probably dehydrated, past the point where most folks would have laid down and quit. That's not fear talking. That's courage. Sarah's eyes welled up, first moisture they'd held in hours. Not from the words were cheap, and she'd heard plenty of lies dressed in kind language. But from the tone, from the way Marcus spoke to her like she was human, rather than property person, rather than thing someone worthy of respect, rather than just use. Doc moved closer, each step announced by the soft creak of leather and the quiet jingle of equipment. He knelt beside Marcus, opened the med kit with practiced efficiency, pulled out supplies that caught the fluorescent light, gauze antiseptic butterfly closures. I need to lift your shirt to see the wound. Just the side, just enough to treat it. You're in control here. You say stop, I stop. Understood. Sarah nodded. The motion felt foreign, like her neck had forgotten how consent worked, how she got to make choices about her own body. Her fingers uncurled from around her knees, reached for the hem of torn flannel, lifted it slowly up her right side. Doc leaned in, professional assessment, automatic. The bullet graze ran 4 inches along her ribs, shallow, but inflamed edges red with early infection. He reached for antiseptic movements, telegraphed and careful. Then his hand stopped. His eyes had traveled past the wound to the skin below her ribs, to the scar tissue raised in deliberate pattern, to letters burned deep enough to keloid visible even in harsh fluorescent wash. Property of Ravens, MC, 4 inches by 2 inches of branded ownership, marking her the way ranchers mark cattle, the way sadists mark victims. They wanted to carry their signature forever. The branding iron had been precise, professional, designed to leave no ambiguity about what the mark meant. Doc's breath caught. 34 years since Vietnam, 40 years since he'd been young enough to be shocked by human cruelty, and still the air stuck in his throat like he'd inhaled glass. Marcus saw Doc's expression, followed his gaze. Every muscle in the Marine's body went rigid. Not the tension that precedes movement, the tension that precedes explosion. His jaw set so hard the scar tissue stretched tight across his cheek, white against weathered tan. Behind them, the other 5 riders had moved closer. They saw what Marcus saw, what Doc saw. The kind of thing that short-circuits language and goes straight to the primitive brainstem where rage lives. James Washington Bear, to anyone who'd known him more than 5 minutes, turned away. 65 years old, 6'4", 280 pounds of muscle earned through decades of hard living and harder choices. Gentle giant who spoke soft and moved careful because he'd learned early that his size made people nervous. Former Army Ranger who'd seen things in Somalia that still woke him up at 3 a.m. He turned away because looking at that brand made his hands shake, and when his hands shook, they wanted to hurt someone, and hurting someone right now wouldn't help the girl who needed help more than the world needed revenge. Bear's fists clenched so tight his knuckles cracked like small-caliber gunfire. Vincent Chen's smoke to the Brotherhood stood absolutely still. 60 years old Chinese-American tracker and surveillance specialist who'd learned silence the way other people learned breathing. His wife Sarah and daughter Lily had died 5 years back. When a gang hit went wrong, bullets meant for someone else finding flesh that had never done anything but love him. He looked at the brand on this girl named Sarah and saw his dead wife's face and felt a kind of rage that doesn't make noise, just burns hot and steady like phosphorus that water can't extinguish. Rita Kowalski Wrench spat on the ground. 55 years old, 5'6", built like compressed steel. Female mechanic in a world that still thought women couldn't understand torque ratios. Afghanistan veteran, 3 tours, seen and done things that earned her the right to walk into any room and own it. She'd killed men for less than what that brand represented. The silence stretched. Not peaceful, not comfortable. The silence of 7 people simultaneously calculating violence, measuring consequences, deciding whether justice could be served immediately or required patience. Marcus spoke first. His voice came out rough, scraped raw by the effort of keeping it level. "Who did this to you?" Sarah's eyes had gone distant, focusing on something beyond the present moment, beyond the gas station, in the desert, in the men in leather who surrounded her. Her voice came out flat, affect, stripped away by exhaustion and trauma, and the soul-deep weariness of someone who'd already died inside and was just waiting for her body to catch up. "The same people who come looking for me, and when they find me—" She paused, swallowed, continued, "When they find me, they'll do worse. They always do worse." Doc finished treating the bullet graze in silence, butterfly closures pulling edges together, gauze wrap securing everything. Professional competence overriding the tremor in his hands through sheer force of will. 40 years of muscle memory, knew how to work even when the mind wanted to shut down. Marcus pulled his club vest off leather and patches, and history draped it over Sarah's shoulders. The weight settled around her like armor, like shield, like the physical manifestation of protection. She pulled it tighter, fingers gripping worn leather that smelled like road and rain and the particular scent of belonging. "We need to get her somewhere safe." Doc's voice had found its steadiness, again medical training, providing structure when emotion threatened coherence. "She's dehydrated, malnourished, in shock. The infection's early, but it'll spread. She needs fluids, antibiotics, rest." Marcus stood, movements deliberate, turned to face his crew. 6 faces looking back at him, waiting for the decision that would come. Not democracy, not vote. Leadership meant making calls, and he'd been making them for 15 years as president of the Desert Riders chapter. "Bear, take point. Smoke rear guard. We're going to the clubhouse. Doc, you ride with Sarah in the truck. Wrench, get your vehicle. Everyone else, formation." He paused, letting the weight of what came next settle. "And we're armed. Full protocol." The Brotherhood moved with a coordination of people who'd ridden together so long they could communicate in glances and gestures. Wrench jogged to a pickup truck parked in shadow. Bear's road glide rumbled to life. Smoke checked his mirrors, adjusted his position. The formation took shape, protective cocoon of chrome and leather and armed competence. Marcus looked down at Sarah, still huddled against the wall with his vest wrapped around her. Can you stand? She tried, failed, tried again with Marcus's hand offered, gripped tight, pulled herself vertical, through determination that outweighed physical capability. Her legs trembled, but held. What's your name, Sarah? The word came out rusty. Sarah Mitchell. Sarah, my name is Marcus. Used to be Marine Corps a long time ago. Now I'm just an old biker who believes some things are worth fighting for. He gestured to the pickup truck where Wrench was opening the passenger door. We're going to take you somewhere safe. You can trust that, or you can choose not to. Either way, we're not leaving you here. But I need you to understand something. He paused, making sure she was hearing him, making sure the words would land. Once we move, once we take you under protection, the people who branded you become our problem. That's how Brotherhood works. We don't do halfway. So if you're coming with us, you need to know this doesn't end at a safe house and a hot meal. This ends when you're free. Actually free, the kind of free that doesn't wake up at 3 a.m. wondering when they're coming back. Sarah searched his face again, found the same steady presence, the same bone-deep sadness, in something new promise. Not the kind that got spoken at weddings or written in contracts. The kind that got carved into scars and settled into the marrow of men who'd seen enough broken promises to know which ones held weight. Why? The question held 2 years of confusion, of trying to understand why some people hurt and others helped, why cruelty came easy and kindness required explanation. You don't even know me. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. His hand moved to his vest, the one now wrapped around Sarah's shoulders, reached into an interior pocket, pulled out something that caught the fluorescent light. A photograph worn soft at the edges from handling colors faded by time and touch. A girl. 8 years old, gap-toothed, smile eyes bright with the kind of joy that comes before the world teaches you to be careful with happiness. She sat on Marcus's shoulders, a younger Marcus, 30-something, wearing Marine Corps dress blues, looking up at his daughter with an expression that held every ounce of love a father could carry. The back of the photograph held 2 lines of faded ink, Daddy and Megan, 1990. Her name was Megan. Marcus's voice went rough. My daughter. Lost her 27 years ago while I was deployed. Gang violence. Wrong place, wrong time. She was 8. He looked from the photo to Sarah, and the connection he was making became visible in the way his eyes went bright with moisture that pride wouldn't let fall. You remind me of her. Not because you look alike, because you both deserve better than you got. And because I failed her, I can't fail you. Sarah felt something crack inside her chest, not breaking, but breaking open. The kind of fracture that lets light into spaces that had been dark so long, they'd forgotten what illumination felt like. I'm 22. The words came out automatic, then their meaning caught up. She'd be 35 if she'd lived. Marcus put the photo back in his vest pocket with the care of someone handling religious relics. But she didn't. So now I show up for people who need someone to show up. It's not complicated. It's not heroic. It's just what you do when you've got miles left to ride and nothing left to lose except your word. Doc called from the truck. Marcus offered his arm. Sarah took it, let him guide her across concrete that her feet left red prints on, helped her into the passenger seat where Wrench had already positioned a blanket and a bottle of water. The formation rolled out 2 bikes ahead, 2 behind truck, in the middle protective convoy moving through desert darkness at steady 60 miles per hour. Headlights carved tunnels through black that pressed in from all sides. Stars overhead so bright they looked close enough to touch desert sky uncontaminated by city light. Sarah held the water bottle but didn't drink. Exhaustion pulled at her, but sleep meant vulnerability. Vulnerability meant danger. Danger meant her eyes drifted closed despite intention. The rumble of motorcycles, the steady vibration of the truck, the first feeling of safety she'd experienced in 2 years, it all conspired to drag her under. Her last conscious thought was wondering if she'd wake up, and if she did, whether waking would prove this had all been fever dream hallucination. The convoy pulled into the Angels clubhouse 40 minutes later. Converted garage outside Flagstaff, 10 miles from town, far enough for privacy, but close enough for supply runs. Single-story structure with reinforced doors and security cameras, and the kind of fortification that came from years of knowing trouble didn't always call ahead. Marcus carried Sarah inside. She'd passed out 20 minutes into the drive, settled her on a couch in the main room. Doc went to work with IV bag and antibiotics and the professional competence of someone who'd stabilize patients in worse conditions. The Angels formed a perimeter checking cameras, securing entrances, falling into defensive positions that muscle memory had encoded through practice and necessity. Rita made coffee. The smell filled the space, safety and normalcy, and the small rituals that kept people human when circumstances tried to strip humanity away. She poured 7 cups without asking, added whiskey to 3, knew without asking who needed what. Bear stood at the window looking out at darkness beyond security lights. His hands had stopped shaking. The rage that made them shake had settled into something colder, more focused, more dangerous. The kind of anger that didn't need volume to make itself heard. We're going after them. Not a question. Statement of fact. Marcus drank coffee laced with whiskey, considered the statement, found no argument worth making. Yeah, we are. Smoke pulled out his laptop, fingers moving across keys with the precision of someone who'd spent decades tracking things, people, money, information. The internet held secrets if you knew where to look, and Smoke knew where to look the way pilots knew how to find north without instruments. Ravens MC, based in New Mexico near the border. Trafficking operation, drugs, weapons, people. Run by Derek Moreno, street name Snake. 38 years old, priors for assault, extortion, suspected in 3 homicides but never charged. Connected to Sinaloa cartel. Compound located 40 miles south of here, industrial area outside Gallup. Doc checked Sarah's vitals, adjusted the IV drip, pulled a blanket over her sleeping form. She's stable, physically anyway. Trauma's gonna take longer. That brand, he stopped, professional detachment failing him. That kind of marking, it's not just physical, it's psychological warfare. Breaking someone down until they believe the brand defines them. Rita set her coffee down hard enough that ceramic cracked against wood. So we burn it off, not literally, metaphorically. We show her the brand was wrong. Marcus walked to the couch, looked down at Sarah's sleeping face. 22 years old, but carrying decades of damage. He thought about Megan, about promises made, and kept, about promises broken, and the weight of those failures. First, we keep her safe. Then we make sure she stays safe. Then he paused, the decision settling with the weight of stone. Then we make sure the people who did this can't do it again. To anyone. Bear turned from the window. We're 7, they're 20 plus. Those are bad odds. We've faced worse, have we? Bear's question held genuine curiosity rather than challenge. When, Marcus thought back. Beirut, when the barracks exploded and he'd pulled 3 Marines from rubble while ammunition cooked off like fireworks. Kuwait, when they'd been cut off and outnumbered and fought their way back to friendly lines through sheer bloody-minded refusal to quit. A dozen bar fights and street conflicts, and the kind of violence that came from living on the edge where civilization ended and old rules reasserted themselves. Yeah, we have. And we're still here. Smoke's laptop chimed. He leaned closer, reading something that made his expression go flat. Ravens just posted on the dark web. $100,000 bounty. Dead or alive. Posted Sarah's description, last known location, everything. The room went quiet. Mathematics became simple. $100,000 would motivate a lot of people to do a lot of things. Every bounty hunter, every desperate criminal, every opportunist with more greed than sense would be looking for a 22-year-old woman with a brand on her ribs. Sarah stirred on the couch, consciousness rising toward the surface like a diver coming up for air. Her eyes open, focused, found Marcus standing over her. For a moment, panic flashed. Strange room, strange man, 2 years of conditioning, saying this was when violence happened. Then memory caught up. The gas station, the ride, the promise. She sat up slowly, IV line pulling taut until Doc moved to adjust it. Where am I? Safe. Marcus's voice held the same steady certainty it had carried at the gas station. You're at our clubhouse. Nobody knows you're here. Nobody's getting in without going through us first. Sarah processed this skepticism, warring with desperate hope. Hope hurt worse than skepticism. Hope could break you. They posted a bounty, $100,000. Every criminal in 3 states will be looking for me. Let them look. Marcus's tone held no bravado, just fact. They won't find you. And if they do, they'll wish they hadn't. You don't understand. Sarah's voice cracked, 2 years of fear pouring through the fracture. Derek Moreno's snake, he's insane. Psychopath. He doesn't just hurt people, he owns them. That brand, it's not decoration. It's a promise. He said I'd never belong to anyone else. That even if I ran, this mark would bring me back. She pulled the blanket aside, lifted the shirt Doc had replaced, showed them the brand again, in better light. The letters seemed to pulse with their own malevolence. Property of Ravens, M's permanent reminder of powerlessness. Marcus knelt beside the couch, getting to her eye level the way he had at the gas station. Made himself small, made himself approachable. Not anymore. 2 words, absolute. That brand was his lie. We're going to prove it wrong. Sarah wanted to believe him, wanted it with the kind of desperate intensity that made her chest ache. But belief required energy. She didn't have hope, required strength she'd lost somewhere in the last 2 years. How you can't erase a brand. You can't make this go away. Rita spoke up from where she stood against the wall, arms crossed, expression carved from flint. No, but we can cover it, transform it, take what he meant to destroy you and turn it into something that empowers you. It's not about erasing, it's about reclaiming. The idea landed like seed in soil, small, fragile, but carrying potential for growth. Sarah touched the brand through her shirt, feeling raised scar tissue that had become unwelcome geography she carried everywhere. I don't know if I can. You don't have to know yet. Marcus stood, moved back to give her space. First things first, you need rest, food, time to heal. The other decisions can wait. Right now you're safe. That's enough. Outside, dawn began its slow crawl across the eastern sky. Desert sunrise, spectacular and violent, and beautiful in the way only harsh places can be beautiful. Light hit the clubhouse windows, turned them gold, pushed darkness back to wherever darkness went to wait for the next night. Sarah lay back down, let exhaustion take her again. This time sleep came easier. Nightmare images less vivid. The knowledge that armed men stood between her and danger, providing comfort that pharmaceutical sedation never could. The angels moved to the main room, leaving her to rest. Marcus poured fresh coffee. Bear checked weapons. Smoke continued tracking digital breadcrumbs. Rita inventoried supplies. Doc wrote notes in the neat handwriting that medical school had beaten into him decades ago. They didn't discuss what came next. Didn't need to. The decision had made itself the moment they saw that brand. Some things didn't require debate. Some things were simple. A woman had been hurt. Men responsible needed to answer. Brotherhood meant showing up. Honor meant seeing it through. Marcus pulled out the photograph of Megan again, studied her gap-toothed smile, remembered the promise he'd made, standing at her grave. Never again. Never again would he let someone hurt when he could prevent it. Never again would he arrive too late. He'd been too late for Megan. But Sarah was still alive, still breathing, still fighting. And that meant he had a chance to keep the promise he'd made to his daughter by showing up for someone else's daughter who needed someone to show up. Bear's voice cut through the quiet. When do we move? Marcus put the photograph away, looked at his crew, scarred and weathered, and carrying their own damage, but solid, reliable, the kind of men you wanted beside you when everything went wrong. Tonight, we move tonight. Sarah woke to the smell of coffee and bacon's sensory combinations so foreign after 2 years of stale bread and fear that her brain struggled to process it as real. Sunlight streamed through windows. She controlled the view from curtains. She could close door. She could lock from inside. Small freedoms that added up to something revolutionary. The guest room held minimal furniture, bed, dresser, chair. But the lock on the inside of the door meant everything. She'd tested it 17 times since Marcus showed her the room. Click, freedom, click, control, click. Proof that this wasn't another version of the cage she'd escaped. Her feet throbbed. Doc had cleaned and bandaged them during the night work so gentle she'd barely stirred. The IV line was gone, replaced by bottles of water on the nightstand and a note in precise handwriting. Drink all of these. Antibiotics on dresser. Take with food. She stood slowly, testing whether her legs remembered their purpose. They held, shaky but functional. The flannel shirt had been replaced with clean-clothes jeans that fit reasonably well, a soft t-shirt that didn't scratch against healing wounds. Someone had anticipated her size, prepared for her arrival before they'd known she existed. The brand pulled tight when she moved scar tissue, reminding her it would never let her forget. She traced the letters through fabric, property of Raven's MC, and felt the familiar wave of shame that had become her constant companion. Shame that she'd been caught. Shame that she'd been broken. Shame that she'd believed the brand when it told her she was nothing more than what it said. Voices drifted through the door. Male voices, but lacking the edge that preceded violence. She opened the door slowly, peered into the main room, where the angels had gathered around a table covered in papers and laptop screens. Marcus saw her first. His nod held acknowledgement without expectation. She could join or retreat, her choice, no pressure. That simple gesture of autonomy nearly broke her. 2 years since anyone had treated her decisions as valid. She walked in. 7 pairs of eyes tracked her movement, but nobody spoke, nobody demanded explanation. Rita pushed a plate of food across the table, scrambled eggs, bacon toast, and gestured to an empty chair. Sarah sat, picked up a fork. The first bite hit her stomach like a stone system shocked by actual nutrition after months of subsistence rations. She forced herself to eat slowly, knowing too much too fast would make her sick. Bear worked on weapons at the far end of the table, hands moving with the practiced ease of someone who'd field stripped, rifles in darkness under fire. Each piece laid out in precise order, cleaned, oiled, reassembled. The choreography held its own meditation. Smoke studied his laptop screen, fingers flying across keys, pulling information from sources that didn't advertise their existence. Digital forensics had replaced the tracking skills he'd learned hunting in California mountains as a kid, but the principle remained: follow the trail until you found what you hunted. Raven's compound confirmed. His voice held no inflection, just facts delivered without editorializing. 40 miles south outside Gallup, industrial zone, abandoned warehouse district. Main building is a former meatpacking plant, 3 stories, reinforced concrete, limited entry points. 2 guard towers, chain link perimeter motion sensors on the north and east approaches. He pulled up satellite imagery, thermal scans from last night, patrol patterns mapped over the last 72 hours. Professional level reconnaissance that spoke to skills honed through decades of practice. 18 heat signatures inside as of 0400 hours. 3 separate from the main cluster, locked room on the 2nd floor, likely additional captives. Guard rotation every 6 hours, 4 men minimum on perimeter at any time. Weapons cache in the basement, confirmed through municipal records showing ammunition purchases through a front company. Doc studied the layout, medical training, translating to tactical assessment. Entry points, evacuation routes where casualties would stack up if things went wrong. He'd done similar calculations in Vietnam before operations math that measured lives in inches and seconds. What about response time? Local law enforcement backup from other chapters. Gallup PD is 15 minutes out. New Mexico State Police, 20. Ravens have connections with 2 other MC chapters within 50 miles, Iron Disciples and Road Devils. If they call for help, we could be looking at reinforcements arriving within 30 minutes. The mathematics didn't favor them. 7 against 18 minimum, possibly 50 if things escalated. The kind of odds that made smart people reconsider. Marcus drank coffee that had gone cold, staring at the satellite imagery like it might reveal secrets the camera missed. His hand moved to his vest pocket, unconscious gesture, checking that Megan's photograph remained where he'd carried it for 27 years. What about Sinaloa presence? Smoke said they're connected. Cartel representatives on site as of 2 days ago. 4 men, unconfirmed armament, purpose unclear. Could be delivery, could be quality control, could be picking up their investment. Smoke pulled up a separate file, grainy photographs of 4 men entering the compound in a black SUV. Mexican plates registered to a shell corporation in Juarez. These aren't street dealers, these are enforcers. The room absorbed that information in silence. Cartel involvement changed everything. Local criminals operated under constraints. Cops, courts, consequences. Cartel operated under different rules, the kind of written in mass graves and bodies hanging from overpasses as a warning to anyone who interfered with business. Sarah set down her fork, appetite dissolving under the weight of what she'd brought into these people's lives. You can't do this. If the cartel's involved, if you hit that compound, her voice cracked, but she forced the words out anyway. They'll kill you. All of you. They don't make threats. They just execute. Marcus looked at her gray-blue eyes, steady decision already made and settled. Probably. But doing nothing guarantees you go back there. Or someone else does. Those three women Smoke mentioned locked on the second floor. They're somebody's daughter too. Somebody's sister. Maybe somebody's mother. He paused, letting the weight distribute evenly. I've been shot before. I've been stabbed, beaten, blown up, and left for dead. I'm still here, and I'm not letting you or anyone else go back to that place because I was too scared to do what's right. This isn't right, it's suicide. Maybe, but there's different kinds of death. The kind where your body stops working, and the kind where you keep breathing but stop being human. I'd rather risk the first than guarantee the second. The logic held its own twisted honor. Sarah recognized it because she'd made similar calculation when she ran. Death by bullet versus death by inches, she'd chosen the gamble. Rita cleared plates, movements efficient, no wasted motion. Mechanics' hands precise and capable, carrying Afghanistan's lessons about economy of movement when bullets made waste expensive. We need more intel on the interior layout. Satellite shows exterior, but we're blind on room configuration, stairwell locations where they're keeping the women. She looked at Sarah. How long were you there? 2 years, 23 months, 14 days. The precision came automatic. Each day counted like a prisoner, marking cell walls. But I only saw parts of the compound. They kept me in a room on the second floor only to let me out for... She stopped, the memories pressing in. For work. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. Can you describe what you remember? Layout, number of rooms, exits? Sarah closed her eyes, willing herself back to the place her mind had spent months trying to escape. The memory came in fragments, disjointed, trauma-scrambled, but usable. Ground floor is open space. Used to be a slaughterhouse, still has the hooks and drains. They use it for... Another pause, swallowing bile. For meetings, parties, the kind where... She couldn't finish, didn't need to. The angels' faces told her they understood exactly what kind of parties. Stairs at the north end, concrete, 2 flights to second floor. Metal door at the top, always locked from the stairwell side. Code activated 4 digits. I saw Snake punch it in a few times. Started with 7, that's all I got. Smoke made notes, fingers flying. 4-digit code starting with 7 gave them workable odds if they could reach the door. Second floor has 12 rooms, 8 on the east side, 4 on the west. East rooms are where they kept... Her voice went flat, effect stripped away by necessity. Where they kept the merchandise, women mostly, a few men, just varied. They'd bring them in, break them down, ship them out. I was there longer than most. Snake liked having his... The word caught in her throat like broken glass. His favorites. Doc's hands shook harder. He pressed them flat against the table, medical training providing clinical distance when emotion threatened to overwhelm. He'd seen atrocities in Vietnam. Thought he'd seen the worst of what humans could do to each other. Kept being proven wrong. How many guards on the second floor? 2 usually, sometimes 3 if they had new arrivals who still fought. They rotated every 6 hours, stayed at the end of the hallway by the stairs. Mostly they just played cards, watched phones, got bored. That's when mistakes happened. Bear looked up from weapon maintenance, voice gentle despite his size. The 3 women Smoke tracked. You know anything about them? Sarah nodded, memory providing faces even when she wished it wouldn't. Rosa, 17, maybe 18, Mexican brought over with promises of work. Been there 6 months last I saw. Strong, still fighting. Snake hated her for it. Pride crept into her voice. She bit him once. He broke her arm, but she smiled the whole time he did it. Told him in Spanish that he'd die screaming. A ghost of a smile crossed Rita's face. Women who fought back deserved honor, regardless of outcome. Vietnamese 15, lured with fake scholarship offer. 8 months. Quiet, smart. She was teaching me Vietnamese, giving me something to focus on besides... Sarah's throat closed. She played piano before, had calluses on her fingers from practicing. She'd drum them on the wall, practicing pieces she couldn't hear anymore. Third one, Becca, 19, American, story like mine, wrong place, wrong time. 5 months. She was new enough that she still believed someone would come. Kept saying her boyfriend was looking for her, that he wouldn't stop until he found her. I wanted to believe her, but it had been 5 months and nobody came. The silence that followed held weight. Nobody came. Until now. Until 7 scarred men on motorcycles decided that answering for evil was more important than preservation. Smoke checked his watch. We've got 12 hours until nightfall. Optimal strike time is 0300 middle of guard rotation change fatigue factor. Highest reduced visibility works in our favor. He looked at Marcus. But we need to address the bounty. $100,000 is going to pull every hunter and criminal in 3 states. We move tonight, but Sarah needs to disappear first. Separate locations secure someone staying with her. Marcus considered. Splitting the crew reduced their effectiveness, but leaving Sarah undefended invited exactly the scenario they were trying to prevent. Rita stays with Sarah. Secure location, armed mobile phone with encrypted channel. We go in 6 strong, hit fast, extract the women, burn evidence. In and out before reinforcements arrive. And if the cartel representatives are still there, then we deal with them. Marcus's tone allowed no negotiation. This isn't complicated. We're not negotiating. We're not compromising. We're ending this. The plan settled over the room like snow, cold covering everything, changing the landscape. Each man ran mental calculations, checking equipment, preparing for the transition from discussion to action. Headlights flashed across the window. Everyone moved simultaneously, weapons drawn, positions, taken defensive posture, automatic as breathing. Years of practice meant they didn't need to discuss who covered which angle, who had point, who held reserve. Smoke checked the security camera feed. 2 vehicles, county sheriff plates, Bradshaw and a deputy. Marcus holstered his weapon, tension easing a fraction. Tom Bradshaw had been a friend for 30 years, ever since they'd served together in Kuwait. Marine Corps built bonds that time didn't erode, but this situation carried complications that friendship couldn't automatically solve. The angels relaxed but stayed alert. Sarah moved toward the back room, instinct saying fewer eyes on her meant safer. Marcus stopped her with a gentle hand on her shoulder. It's okay, Tom's good people. She stayed anyway, positioning herself behind Doc, where his bulk provided cover. 2 years had taught her that trusting men in uniform required verification, regardless of what anyone said. Marcus opened the door. Sheriff Tom Bradshaw stepped through, 68-years-old Vietnam veteran, wearing the weight of a rural county that had more problems than funding. His face carried the particular weathering that came from decades of dealing with the worst humanity offered, while trying to maintain faith that good still existed somewhere. The deputy behind him was younger, mid-30s, nervous energy, hand resting on his sidearm, with the kind of tension that made experienced people nervous. New to the bar or new to understanding that badges didn't guarantee safety. Ghost. Tom used the road name deliberately, marking this as business rather than social. Heard some interesting chatter on the scanners this morning. $100,000 bounty for a young woman, 22, matches the description of the girl I saw last night. His eyes found Sarah despite her attempt to blend into Doc's shadow. That her? Marcus didn't insult Tom's intelligence with denial. Yeah, that's her. And you're planning something stupid. Planning something necessary. Tom removed his hat, ran fingers through hair gone gray enough to be white in certain light. The gesture carried 40 years of dealing with men who confused justice and revenge, honor and violence, who thought problems could be solved with bullets because conversation had failed too many times. Marcus, I know what you're thinking. I know what you want to do. But you hit the Ravens compound. You're not just breaking laws, you're starting a war. And wars have collateral damage. Innocent people get hurt. Innocent people are already hurt. 3 more women locked in that compound. Sarah here, Marcus gestured without looking away from Tom, branded like cattle. You saw that brand, Tom. You know what it means. The sheriff's expression confirmed he'd seen it would carry that image like shrapnel lodged too close to vital organs to extract safely. I know. I also know vigilante justice doesn't end well. We've got FBI working the case. Agent out of Albuquerque trafficking task force. They're building evidence, working toward warrants. These things take time, but they work. How much time? Days, weeks, months. Marcus's voice went hard. Meanwhile, Rosa and Anna and Becca sit in locked rooms waiting for someone to decide their freedom is worth the paperwork. Meanwhile, Snake and his crew traffic more women, destroy more lives, pocket more money. Meanwhile, the Sinaloa cartel expands their operation because nobody wants to make waves. And if you go in shooting, those 3 women die in the crossfire, You thought about that. You planned for that possibility because I've seen enough shootouts to know bullets don't check ID before they hit flesh. The argument held merit, and Marcus knew it. Planning could account for many variables, but chaos had its own mathematics. Once shooting started, control became suggestion rather than command. Sarah stepped out from behind Doc, voice steady, despite the fear that made her hands shake. I can help. I know the layout. I know which room they're in. I can guide them. Tom's expression softened slightly, the paternal instinct that had made him effective sheriff, warring with the pragmatic calculation that said putting victims back in proximity to trauma was bad policy. Ma'am, I appreciate your courage, but putting you back in that compound is exactly what we're trying to prevent. I'm already there. Every night when I close my eyes, I'm there. At least this way, I'm there doing something instead of just surviving it again. The logic was skewed, but held its own truth. Victims carried their prisons internally long after escaping physical walls. Sometimes returning with power felt better than fleeing and carrying the fear forever. Tom looked at Marcus, then Sarah, then the assembled angels who waited for whatever came next with the patience of men who'd learned stillness under fire. I can't officially sanction this. You know that. I've got jurisdiction to consider federal cooperation requirements chain of command. But he paused, the word carrying weight that changed everything that followed. If someone were to provide anonymous intelligence about criminal activity in my county, and if federal agents happened to arrive at approximately the same time as local law enforcement to find evidence of said criminal activity he already secured by unknown parties, well, sometimes timing works in mysterious ways. Marcus understood the offer. Tom couldn't help officially, but unofficial assistance came in many forms, including conveniently timed responses and carefully managed ignorance about who did what. We'd need communication, someone to coordinate timing. My deputy here, Tom gestured to the nervous young man who'd stayed silent through the exchange. He's new, still learning protocol, might accidentally monitor the wrong radio frequency at the wrong time, might hear something that requires immediate response without quite knowing who he's coordinating with. The deputy nodded, understanding his role in the theater Tom was constructing. Plausible deniability required layers, and each layer needed actors who knew their lines. Smoke pulled his laptop around, showed Tom the compound layout, patrol patterns, optimal entry points. Information sharing that technically violated half a dozen protocols, but served justice better than bureaucratic compliance. FBI agent you mentioned, she have a name. Rodriguez, Maria Rodriguez, out of Albuquerque, like I said. She's been tracking the Ravens for 3 years, building case against their entire operation. She won't like civilian involvement. She doesn't have to like it. She just has to arrive in time to collect evidence and make arrests. Tom put his hat back on, adjusted it with the kind of precision that communicated decision made and settled. 0300, that's when my deputy will accidentally monitor that wrong frequency. That's when Agent Rodriguez will mysteriously receive an anonymous tip. That's when I'll have units in the area responding to reported shots fired. He moved toward the door, stopped to look back at Sarah. Ma'am, I hope you find peace, whatever that looks like, however long it takes. She nodded, throat too tight for words. The sheriff and deputy left. Headlights swept across windows and disappeared into morning. The angels returned to preparation, but the dynamic had shifted. They weren't just 7 men on motorcycles anymore. They had law enforcement providing cover, FBI prepared to catch what they threw, timing synchronized to maximize impact while minimizing legal exposure. Smoke's phone buzzed. He checked the screen, expression shifting from neutral to something harder. Emily Mitchell, confirmed location, Phoenix Group home, Northwest Side, age 16, currently in state custody, parental rights terminated due to father's abandonment and mother's death. No immediate family listed. He looked at Sarah. Your sister. She's alive. The information hit Sarah like physical blow. Emily, live. 16 now, 4 years older than the 12-year-old sister she'd left behind when the Ravens took her. 4 years of growing up alone, thinking her sister was dead, navigating the system that ground through vulnerable kids like meat through industrial processors. Tears came without permission. She'd convinced herself Emily was better off believing Sarah was dead. Easier than living with hope that rescue might come. But knowing Emily existed, knowing she'd spent 4 years in the system, That guilt carved fresh grooves into scar tissue that had barely begun healing. Can you, Sarah's voice broke. Can you find her? After when this is over, can you help me find her? Marcus's answer came without hesitation. We'll bring her here. Reunite you. However long it takes, whatever it costs. Family matters. Blood or chosen doesn't make difference. The promise settled over Sarah like blanket warmth that didn't eliminate cold but made it bearable. She had a sister. She had people willing to fight for her. She had a chance at something that looked like future rather than just survival. Rita moved to Sarah's side, voice low but firm. We need to get you out of here. Secure location until this is done. I know a place cabin in the mountains 60 miles north. Off-grid supplies, cash defensible if trouble comes. We leave in an hour. Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to insist on being part of the raid, wanted to face Snake and show him the brand didn't own her anymore. But wisdom born from 2 years of captivity said revenge wasn't worth dying for, and dying would mean Emily stayed alone in the system, wondering why her sister never came back. Okay, the word hurt admission that she wasn't strong enough to stand in the fire yet. But after you get Rosa and An and Becca out, after Snake is in custody or dead, I want to see it. I need to know it's real. You will. Marcus's promise carried the weight of all the ones he'd kept over 27 years of carrying Megan's photograph. We'll bring them to you, let you see with your own eyes that you're free. Actually free. The next hours passed in preparation, weapons cleaned and loaded, maps studied until everyone could navigate the compound blind. Contingencies planned for everything from cartel resistance to structural fire to hostages used as shields. Each scenario ran through mental simulation until responses became automatic. Sarah packed the small bag Rita provided clothes identification Doc had managed to obtain through contacts better left unexamined money that would last a few weeks if stretched. The basics of starting over compressed into a duffel that weighed almost nothing and represented everything. Marcus found her staring at the brand in a mirror, fingers tracing letters that had scarred deeper than skin. Rita meant what she said about covering it, transforming it. There's a tattoo artist in Sedona woman named Chloe. She specializes in covering trauma scars. When you're ready, not now, but when you're ready, we'll take you. Let you reclaim that skin. Sarah met his eyes in the mirror reflection. What if I can't? What if I try to cover it and I still feel it, still see it, still hear Snake's voice telling me I belong to him? Then you try again and again, however many times it takes. Healing isn't linear. It's messy and backward, and sometimes you think you've made progress only to discover you're still carrying weight you thought you'd set down. He touched the scar on his face. Beirut was 34 years ago. I still feel the shrapnel some days. Still hear the explosion. Still smell burning. But it doesn't own me anymore. It's just part of the map that got me here. The perspective offered something like hope. Not the toxic kind that promised easy answers, but the sustainable kind that acknowledged difficulty while insisting possibility remained. Rita appeared in the doorway. Time to go. Sarah followed her to the truck, Marcus walking beside them. The other angels had already mounted their bikes formation, ready engines rumbling that particular Harley Thunder that vibrated in the chest cavity and promised power. Marcus handed Sarah something, Megan's photograph. The one he'd carried for 27 years, touched 10,000 times the one that represented his greatest failure and deepest love. Keep this. Bring it back when we bring your sister. My daughter would want you to have it. Would want you to know you're worth fighting for. Sarah took the photograph with trembling hands, studied the 8-year-old girl's gap-toothed smile, saw in her eyes, the kind of innocence that the world worked hard to destroy but occasionally failed to completely extinguish. I'll protect it. I know you will. Rita started the truck. Sarah climbed in photograph, clutched tight. The convoy rolled out, Rita and Sarah heading north toward mountain safety, the angels heading south toward compound in conflict, in the kind of violence that served purpose even when it broke laws. Marcus watched them disappear, then turned to his crew. 6 men scarred and weathered, carrying damage that would never fully heal, but refused to metastasize into excuse for inaction. Let's ride. They mounted, engines roared, formation tightened. The sun began its arc toward western horizon, promising darkness that would cover their approach and cloak their violence in shadow. 40 miles south, Derek Snake Moreno paced the compound phone pressed to his ear, voice rising with each sentence. I don't care what it costs. I need that girl back. The Sinaloa payment is due in 72 hours, and if I don't deliver, he stopped. Listen, face darkening. Then find her. Put every bounty hunter, every crew, every desperate criminal on the street to work. 100,000 for her return. 50,000 for information that leads to recovery. He ended the call, threw the phone against concrete wall hard enough to shatter. The brand he'd put on Sarah Mitchell was supposed to be permanent reminder that she belonged to him, that escape meant nothing because the mark would bring her back. Instead, she'd vanished, and with her went 50,000 in cartel payment, plus his reputation for control. The four Sinaloa representatives watched from across the room, expressions neutral, but Snake read the calculation in their eyes. Cartels didn't tolerate failure, didn't accept excuses, delivered consequences with the kind of creativity that made normal violence look merciful by comparison. He had 72 hours to find Sarah Mitchell or provide acceptable alternative. Neither option looked promising. The girl had help bounty specified. She'd been seen with Hell's Angels, which meant motorcycle club involvement, which meant complications that made simple recovery unlikely. But complicated didn't mean impossible. And Snake had survived 15 years in the trafficking business by being more ruthless than competition, more willing to do what others flinched from, more creative in application of violence that served purpose. Somewhere in the New Mexico darkness, Sarah Mitchell thought she'd escaped, thought the brand didn't own her anymore, thought 7 men on motorcycles could protect her from the inevitability of ownership. She was wrong, and Snake intended to teach her exactly how wrong, using methods that would make the original branding look like kindness by comparison. The mountain cabin materialized through pine darkness like sanctuary carved from wilderness. Rita had prepared this place years ago, ammunition cached, water filtered, supplies rotated quarterly, insurance against the day when trouble came hunting and civilization offered no protection. Sarah stood at the window watching headlights sweep through trees. 7 motorcycles plus pickup. Truck formation intact, mission parameters met. Her chest unclenched slightly. Oxygen entering lungs that had been holding their breath since the Angels departed 12 hours earlier. Rita checked her phone, nodded confirmation. They're all accounted for. 3 women extracted. 0 casualties our side. The relief hit Sarah like physical blow, knees weakening, hand gripping the windowsill for support. Rosa, Ann, Becca. Women who'd shared her hell, survived the same torture, carried matching scars, psychological if not physical. Free now, actually free. The engines cut simultaneously. Doors opened. Figures emerged from vehicle silhouettes, resolving into faces she thought she might never see again. Rosa moved with the defiance that 2 years of captivity hadn't broken shoulders squared despite exhaustion. 17 or 18, Sarah had never known for certain, but carrying herself like someone who'd stared down evil and refused to blink first. Dark hair, matted clothes torn, but eyes blazing with the particular fury of survivors who'd been told they were broken and decided otherwise. On followed smaller, quieter 15 years, holding decades of damage. Vietnamese features, delicate piano fingers that had once made music now trembling from withdrawal and fear. But moving, walking under her own power. Alive. Becca brought up the rear, 19, blonde American, the newest addition to Hell's roster, before Sarah escaped. 5 months inside compared to Sarah's 2 years. Rosa's 6 months, Ann's 8. Still believed rescue was possible, that her boyfriend was searching, that the system worked for people who needed it. Naive hope that Sarah envied because she'd lost it so long ago. Doc supported on, one arm around her waist, medical assessment automatic even in darkness. Bear walked beside Rosa, maintaining careful distance, respecting boundaries that trauma had reinforced. Marcus helped Becca navigate uneven ground, patience infinite for someone who'd just escaped industrial nightmare. Sarah stepped onto the porch. 4 pairs of eyes found her, recognition exploding across faces that had shared locked rooms and whispered plans and the desperate mathematics of survival. Rosa crossed the distance, first arms wrapping around Sarah with strength that belied her frame. No words. Language inadequate for what passed between them. Shared hell acknowledged. Collective survival. Celebrated promises kept. that neither had dared believe. On joined the embrace, silent tears tracking down cheeks that had learned crying made things worse, but couldn't remember how to stop. Becca completed the circle, and four women nodded together in configuration that communicated more than speeches. Marcus stood back with his crew, giving them space understanding. Some moments belonged exclusively to survivors who'd earned them through suffering outsiders couldn't comprehend. The reunion stretched, contracted, reformed as they moved inside where Rita had hot food waiting, soup, bread, protein that bodies depleted by months of inadequate nutrition desperately needed. They ate slowly, systems shocked by abundance after extended scarcity, doc monitoring to ensure nobody ate too quickly and made themselves sick. Rosa spoke first, voice hoarse but functional. "You made it out. We thought—" She stopped, swallowing emotion. "Snake said you were dead, said he'd made an example that anyone who ran would end the same way." Sarah touched the brand through her shirt, phantom burning that never quite stopped. "He lied about that, about everything. Is he dead?" Anne's question came soft, almost apologetic, as if hoping for violence made her complicit in its execution. Marcus answered before Sarah could. "Federal custody, along with 17 Ravens and 4 cartel representatives. FBI seized the compound evidence that'll dismantle trafficking networks across 3 states. He'll die in prison, but it'll take 40 years to get there." Becca's face fell, a disappointment visible. "He's alive. After everything he—" Her voice cracked. "He gets to breathe while we rebuild." Sarah finished the sentence differently than Becca intended. "While we prove the brand was wrong. While we transform into something he never imagined possible." Doc distributed medication, antibiotics, anti-anxiety prescriptions, pain management carefully calibrated to avoid dependency. Professional competence overriding the tremor in his hands, decades of practice allowing precision despite PTSD that never quite released its grip. Bear-checked perimeter security, motion sensors, armed cameras providing 360 coverage. Old habits from Somalia, from operations where vigilance meant survival and relaxation meant casualties. Rita joined him, both moving through darkness with comfort born from years navigating hostile territory. Smoke worked his laptop, monitoring police scanners, FBI communications, ensuring the story the authorities told matched the story the angels needed told. Digital forensics, erasing footprints, covering tracks, maintaining plausible deniability that protected everyone. 3 days passed in the cabin's isolated safety. Sarah watched the other women navigate the same disorientation she'd experienced: freedom, feeling suspicious when captivity had been constant, safety requiring verification, because lies had worn safety's mask before trust becoming gamble rather than gift. Rosa woke screaming the first night. Sarah sat with her until dawn, neither speaking, presence, sufficient communication. On couldn't sleep without lights on, darkness, triggering panic attacks that medication barely managed. Becca jumped at sudden noises, hands flying up defensively, body remembering violence before mind could register safety. Healing wasn't linear. Doc had warned them. Recovery looked like chaos before it resembled progress: 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, sideways motion that felt like failure, but constituted the messy work of reconstructing selves that trauma had dismantled. On the 4th morning, Smoke's laptop chimed with news alert. He read expression shifting from neutral to something harder, turned the screen so Marcus could see. "Snake's dead." The words landed like stones in still water ripples spreading outward, each woman processing differently. Sarah felt nothing, then felt guilty for feeling nothing, then felt relief that feeling nothing wasn't wrong, just different than expected. "How?" Her voice came steadier than anticipated. "Murdered in federal holding. 3 inmates affiliated with rival trafficking operation. Shanks made from toothbrushes, attacking the shower guards arrived too late." Smoke pulled up the official report. Prison politics. Ravens had territory agreements with the Iron Disciples. Snake violated them. This was payback. Marcus studied Sarah's face, watching for reaction, ready to provide support or space depending on what she needed. "How do you feel?" Sarah considered the question, finding honest answer. "Empty. I thought I'd feel something, relief, satisfaction, closure, but it's just a—" She gestured vaguely. "Absence. He's gone, but the damage isn't. The brand doesn't disappear because he's dead." No, Marcus's agreement carried weight of experience. But he can't make news damage, can't hurt anyone else. That matters even if it doesn't feel like it does. Rosa laughed sound harsh and brittle. Good. I hope it hurt. Hope he spent his last minutes feeling what we felt helpless, terrified knowing nobody was coming to help. Anne said nothing, just returned to drumming her fingers on the table, practicing piano pieces she couldn't hear, finding rhythm in silence. Becca cried tears that confused her because she'd wanted him dead, had fantasized about his death. But now that reality had delivered satisfaction, felt hollow. Doc pulled Sarah aside later, voice low. Grief comes in unexpected forms. You're allowed to feel nothing, allowed to feel everything, allowed to feel confused about feeling both or neither. There's no correct emotional response to your abuser's death. What did you feel when the soldier you couldn't save in Vietnam died? Doc's hands trembled, harder than stilled, as he made conscious choice to answer honestly. Relief, then guilt about relief, then anger that I felt guilty, then exhaustion from feeling so much that I stopped feeling anything. He met her eyes. Took me 30 years to understand that numbness was protection, not failure. My mind gave me what I could handle when handling everything would have broken me. Sarah nodded, filing the wisdom away for later examination when overwhelm wasn't quite so overwhelming. 2 weeks after the raid, Emily arrived. The social worker's car pulled up mid-afternoon, dust rising from unpaved access road, bureaucracy invading sanctuary. Sarah stood on the porch watching her younger sister emerge, 16 now, 4 years older than the 12-year-old Sarah remembered carrying herself with the particular wariness foster system survivors develop through repeated disappointments. Emily saw Sarah and stopped. 30 feet between them, distance measuring more than physical space. 4 years. 2 years of believing her sister was dead. 2 more years of knowing she was alive, but unreachable, trapped in legal proceedings and victim services that prioritize process over reunion. Sarah descended the steps slowly. Emily matched her pace. They met in the middle, arms wrapping around each other, 4 years, compressing into embrace that held all the weight of separation, survival, the stubborn insistence that family mattered despite everything conspiring to destroy it. Emily spoke first, words muffled against Sarah's shoulder. They kept saying soon. For 18 months they said, soon we'll reunite you. I stopped believing them. Figured soon was another word for never. I know, I'm sorry. The system failed us. Emily pulled back, eyes red but voice steady, like it always does. But you're here. You're real. And that's, her voice cracked. That's enough. Marcus had arranged housing, 2-bedroom apartment in Flagstaff, 6 months rent, prepaid furniture, donated from Angels Network, stock kitchen and bathroom locks on every door, including bedrooms. Space that belonged to them, controlled by them, no social workers or foster parents or rules imposed by strangers who meant well but couldn't understand. They moved in that evening, sat on the living room floor eating pizza because chairs wouldn't arrive until next week. Talked about the 4 years between them, Emily's rotation through 5 foster homes, schools she'd attended, then left friends made, then lost the grinding machinery of state custody that processed kids like inventory. Sarah shared edited version of her captivity, enough truth to honor Emily's right to know enough omission to avoid burdening her with details that served no purpose beyond transferring trauma. The brand came up inevitably. Emily asked to see it. Sarah lifted her shirt, showed the scar tissue spelling, property of Ravens MC in raised keloid letters. Emily traced them gently, fingers light against skin that had learned touch meant pain. What are you going to do about it? Cover it. Transform it. There's a tattoo artist who specializes in trauma scars. When I'm ready. How will you know you're ready? Sarah considered, finding honest answer that acknowledged uncertainty. When looking at it doesn't make me feel owned anymore. When I can see history instead of present. When the narrative it tells is mine instead of his. 3 months later, Sarah sat in Chloe's tattoo shop in Sedona with Marcus on one side and Emily on the other. The artist had covered trauma scars for 20 years, understood the weight ink carried when it transformed wounds into stories, damage into agency. Chloe showed the design they developed together, simple, powerful, direct. I am free in bold letters placed precisely over the brand consuming it, rewriting narrative from ownership to autonomy. Smaller editions, semicolon for suicide awareness, tiny phoenix rising motorcycle silhouette, honoring the angels. The needle buzzed. Sarah's body flinched before her mind registered the sound conditioning from the branding creating Pavlovian response that rational thought couldn't override. Marcus took her hand, Emily took the other. Human anchors holding her present while memory tried dragging her past. You're not there. Marcus's voice cut through the flashback starting to spiral. You're here, in Sedona, with people who chose you because you are worth choosing. The needle touched skin. Pain bloomed different from the brand cleaner, purposeful, serving transformation rather than domination. Sarah focused on breathing, counting each inhale and exhale mathematics, providing structure when emotion threatened coherence. Chloe worked with the concentration of someone who understood she wasn't just applying ink, but facilitating ritual healing made visible through pigment and precision. 3 hours passed in increments measured by completed letters rather than clock time. Finally, she set the needle down, stepped back, gestured to the mirror. Sarah stood, slowly walked to her reflection, lifted her shirt. Black ink over raised scar tissue letters reading "I am free," where property of Raven's MC had been visible that morning. The phoenix wings framed the words. The semicolon reminded her that her story wasn't over. The motorcycle honored deliverance that came wearing leather instead of wings. Tears came without permission, streaming down her face, body releasing tension it had carried so long her muscles had forgotten relaxation was possible. It's beautiful. Emily's voice held awe. It's true. Sarah touched the fresh ink, gently feeling heat from inflammation, seeing truth in mirror. I am free. They left the shop as sunset painted desert sky in orange and purple beauty, justifying harsh landscape. Sarah felt lighter despite the fresh wound, as if covering the brand had removed weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. But that night alone in her apartment, the weight returned with compound interest. The breakdown started small, hands shaking while washing dinner dishes, breath catching for no apparent reason, heart rate accelerating despite sitting still. Then the dam broke and everything she'd been holding together through sheer force of will came flooding out. Sarah screamed, not words, just sound, raw, primal, all the terror and rage and grief compressed into vocalization that neighbors 3 apartments away heard through walls. She threw things, plates, shattering glasses, breaking furniture, overturning. Destroyed the careful order she'd built, let chaos reign because chaos felt honest in ways control didn't. Emily heard from her bedroom, started towards Sarah, stopped when she saw the devastation. Called Marcus instead, understanding this was beyond what 16-year-old could handle. Marcus arrived 20 minutes later. Let himself in with the spare key Sarah had given him. Surveyed the wreckage found. Sarah collapsed on the floor surrounded by broken things, sobbing so hard her body convulsed. He didn't try to fix it, didn't offer platitudes. Just sat on the floor 10 feet away, close enough to matter, far enough to respect boundaries, and waited. Hours passed. Sarah's sobs quieted to hiccups, then breathing, then silence. She looked up, saw Marcus sitting patient, as Stone felt gratitude that he hadn't tried to make it better, because better wasn't possible only through. I needed to break. Her voice came hoarse from screaming. Before I could build anything real. I know. Marcus had seen this before, soldiers returning from deployment holding themselves together through reintegration, then shattering when they finally felt safe enough to fall apart. Breaking isn't failing. Sometimes it's necessary demolition before reconstruction. The tattoo was supposed to fix it. The tattoo was a step, not a solution. Healing doesn't happen in single moments. It's accumulation of small choices, daily decisions, gradual progress that includes setbacks and detours, and occasionally complete demolition of structures that weren't serving you anyway. Sarah looked around at the destruction, broken dishes, overturned furniture, holes in drywall where she'd punched through in rage. I destroyed everything. You destroyed things. Things can be replaced. You're still here, still breathing, still choosing. That's what matters. They sat in wreckage until dawn, neither speaking much presence, sufficient communication. When light finally crept through windows, Marcus helped Sarah clean, replacing broken dishes with unbreakable alternatives. Patching drywall, restoring order that felt different now, earned through chaos rather than imposed through force. 1 year after the raid, the Angels organized the first Freedom Ride. 200 motorcycles registered charity event, raising funds for trafficking, survivor services route tracing, Phoenix to Flagstaff, along roads where Sarah had run, been found, been saved. Sarah had resisted public speaking, preferred privacy to performance, the comfortable anonymity of someone rebuilding without scrutiny. But Marcus convinced her that her story needed telling because silence protected predators while exposure created accountability. The rally at Flagstaff drew 500 people, bikers, survivors, advocates, law enforcement, media, documenting event that had become regional phenomenon. Sarah stood backstage watching the crowd panic, rising question looping. What if she forgot her words, stumbled over memories, broke down mid-speech? Marcus materialized beside her, voice calm. You don't have to do this. Nobody's forcing you. I know, but if I don't, Sarah struggled to articulate. If I don't speak, Snake wins. He silenced me for 2 years. I won't let him silence me now, even from the grave. Then speak. Tell your truth. However it comes out, it's enough. She walked onto the stage as afternoon sun warmed her face, stood at the microphone facing sea of expectant faces. Emily stood stage left with the angels. Rosa, Ann, and Becca stood stage right, all three, rebuilding their own lives present to witness Sarah claim, voice that captivity had tried to steal. Sarah began speaking, words flowing easier than anticipated. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 23 years old. 2 years ago, I was stolen. The crowd went quiet attention, focusing with intensity, people reserved for moments they recognize as significant. I was 20 when they took me. Had a younger sister to care for, dreams about maybe going back to school someday. One night I was driving home from work. Next morning I woke up in a locked room 40 miles from anywhere I knew, belonging to men who believed buying me gave them ownership. She paused, letting the weight settle. For 2 years I lived in hell. I was beaten when I disobeyed, broken when I resisted, branded when they decided marking my flesh would ensure I never forgot I was property. They burned letters into my skin, property of ravens, empty, permanent reminder that I belonged to them. Sarah lifted her shirt, showed the covered brand new ink visible to those close enough. Someone told me I'd carry that brand forever, that even if I escaped, it would bring me back, that nobody would want something already marked. I believed him. For 2 years, I believed exactly what he told me to believe. Her voice strengthened. But then I met people who showed me different. 7 men on motorcycles, strangers, who saw my brand and decided immediately that answering for evil mattered more than their own safety. They weren't heroes in the traditional sense. They were scarred, damaged, carrying their own trauma. But they chose to show up anyway. She gestured to the angels standing stage left. Marcus, a 62-year-old Marine who lost his daughter to violence he couldn't prevent, and decided he'd spend the rest of his life preventing violence against others. Doc, a Vietnam medic whose hands still shake from PTSD but stayed steady when I needed him. Bear, a gentle giant who took a knife meant for me, because that's what family does. Smoke, Rita, the brotherhood that proved family isn't blood, it's who shows up. Tears came, but she didn't stop speaking. I could have left the brand visible, carried it as permanent reminder of what was done to me. But I chose differently. Chose to cover it with words that tell my story instead of his. I am free. Not because the trauma disappeared. Not because healing happened overnight. But because I decided the brand doesn't get to define me. She pulled her shirt down, meeting eyes in the crowd. To the survivors here tonight, you know who you are. You are not defined by what was done to you. You're defined by what you choose to become after. The trauma is real, the damage is real, but so is your strength, so is your survival, so is your choice to keep showing up despite everything that tried to destroy you. Her voice carried across the crowd. And to the people who show up for survivors, the volunteers, the advocates, the friends who don't run when things get messy, the strangers who decide helping matters more than safety, you're why hope exists. You're why some of us make it when statistics say we shouldn't. She looked at Marcus, who nodded approval from the shadows. 2 years ago, I stumbled into a gas station at 3 a.m. barefoot and bleeding, convinced I was about to die. Instead, I met angels. They didn't have wings. They had motorcycles. They didn't have halos. They had scars. But they showed up, and showing up made all the difference. She gripped the microphone, final words coming from place deeper than rehearsal. I'm standing here today not because I'm special or uniquely strong. I'm standing here because someone showed up. Someone decided my life had value. Someone proved that brands can be covered, stories can be rewritten, ownership can be reclaimed. That's freedom, not the absence of scars, but the presence of choice. Applause erupted, not polite recognition, but standing ovation that continued for 2 minutes straight, 500 people acknowledging they'd witnessed testimony rather than performance. Sarah stepped back from the microphone, overwhelmed, grateful, still carrying damage, but no longer crushed by it. Emily rushed onto stage, arms wrapping around her sister. The angels formed protective circle Brotherhood that had saved her life, now celebrating her reclamation of voice. 5 years after the raid, metrics had transformed everything. Sarah Mitchell, age 28, held a bachelor's degree in social work from Arizona State University. She directed the Marked for Freedom Foundation nonprofit serving trafficking survivors through housing assistance, legal advocacy therapy, funding job training, holistic care, acknowledging trauma affected every dimension of existence. The foundation occupied restored building in downtown Phoenix. 80 survivors had passed through their program, 72 successfully reintegrated into independent living. Numbers measuring lives reconstructed rather than just days survived. Emily graduated college on full academic scholarship, planning law school, determined to dismantle trafficking networks through prosecution. The sisters maintained separate apartments. Bubba remained close weekly dinners, comparing notes on building lives from fragments. Marcus, 67, now had reduced his angels' responsibilities, but still showed up, still carried Megan's photograph alongside newer photos, documenting lives he'd helped save. His grandson James had enlisted in the Marines, serving in ways that honored both Megan's memory and Marcus's example. Doc published a memoir about combat trauma and civilian healing, speaking engagements taking him nationwide, his shaking hands finally steadying after 45 years. Bear ran youth center teaching discipline through self-defense, grandfather now to twin grandchildren. Smoke's tracking skills had legitimized through private investigation firm specializing in missing persons. Rita's motorcycle shop employed 15 mechanics, 12 of them women. Rosa operated a restaurant in Tucson, Tex-Mex fusion that drew crowds and rave reviews. Ann taught piano to underprivileged children, music therapy, healing others while continuing her own recovery. Becca worked as trauma nurse night shifts at emergency rooms where she recognized the signs of abuse that others missed. On the 5th anniversary of the Freedom Ride, Sarah stood at the original gas station where Marcus had found her. The location had been preserved, transformed into a historical marker commemorating the night 7 angels chose to answer evil with action. A bronze plaque mounted on the wall read, "On this site, September 15, 2025, Sarah Mitchell found freedom. In memory of Marcus Ghost Reeves and all who show up when showing up matters most." Marcus had died 6 months earlier. Heart attack, quick and clean, the exit soldiers hoped for after surviving things that should have killed them decades prior. 2,000 people attended his funeral. Marines, bikers, survivors, the chosen family he'd assembled through decades of showing up. They'd scattered his ashes along Route 66 per his wishes, wanting to ride forever through landscape he'd loved, country he'd served, roads where he'd found purpose after losing his daughter. Sarah touched the plaque bearing his name, feeling cold bronze that held memory of man who'd saved her life by proving brands didn't define destiny. Emily arrived with 3 young people interns from the foundation, Next Generation, learning that advocacy required persistence, empathy, refusal to quit when systems failed and bureaucracy ground slow. The youngest intern, girl maybe 19, studied the plaque, then looked at Sarah. "Did you really know him, Marcus Reeves?" "He was family, not blood chosen, the best kind." "What was he like?" Sarah considered the question, finding answer that honored complexity. "Broken in ways he carried quietly, haunted by daughter he'd lost and couldn't save. But he transformed that damage into purpose, showed up for others because showing up mattered, rode into hell to extract strangers because some debts demand payment regardless of cost." She smiled. "He was exactly what angels look like when they trade wings for motorcycles." The girl seemed satisfied with that answer. The group moved toward the foundation van, afternoon appointments waiting. Sarah remained at the plaque alone with memory and gratitude. She pulled out something from her pocket, the photograph Marcus had given her that first night. Megan Reeves, age 8, gap-toothed smile sitting on her father's shoulders, both frozen in moment before tragedy. Marcus had carried this photograph for 27 years. given it to Sarah when she needed tangible proof someone believed she was worth the weight of promises. She'd kept it 5 years protection and reminder and talisman against the voices saying she deserved what happened. But standing at the memorial where deliverance had occurred, Sarah understood the photograph had completed its journey. She placed it in the small memorial box mounted beside the plaque space for people to leave offerings, tokens, recognition that this ground held sacred meaning for survivors and advocates alike. Thank you. Sarah spoke to the photograph, to Marcus's memory, to the universe that had delivered angels when she'd needed them most. For showing up, for proving the brand was wrong, for teaching me that trauma doesn't get the final word unless we let it. She walked to the van where Emily waited. They drove back toward Phoenix sunset, painting sky in colors that justified the harsh landscape beauty emerging from difficulty, light born from darkness. The brand still lived beneath the tattoo, faint outline visible in certain angles, phantom sensation that never quite disappeared. But it no longer owned her, no longer defined her. Had transformed from brand into map, history into testimony, pain into purpose. 23-year-old Sarah, barefoot and bleeding, had whispered, "Just kill me fast," under flickering neon. 28-year-old Sarah drove toward Foundation work sister beside her. Life rebuilt from fragments, future written in her words rather than snakes. That was freedom. Not the absence of damage, but the presence of agency. Not the erasure of trauma, but the choice about what trauma meant. Not forgetting the past, but refusing to let past dictate future. Some angels rode motorcycles. Some became them. And Sarah Mitchell, survivor and advocate and living testament to transformation, had learned that deliverance came in forms that defied expectation, required accepting help from scarred strangers, demanded believing that showing up mattered even when everything suggested otherwise. She kept driving, kept showing up, kept proving that brands could be covered. Stories could be rewritten, ownership could be reclaimed. I am free. 3 words. Simple. True. Earned through miles of road, years of healing choices, refusing to accept that broken was permanent condition rather than temporary state requiring patient reconstruction. The motorcycle rumble lived in memory now rather than present. 7 riders in formation, engines synchronized, heading towards someone who needed angels wearing leather instead of wings. But the legacy remains: show up, keep promises, prove that trauma doesn't write endings unless we surrender the pen. Sarah Mitchell had decided 5 years ago under flickering neon and desert stars that her ending would be written in her words, her choices, her terms. And 5 years later, driving toward work that honored that choice, she understood the story wasn't finished, would never be finished. Because survival wasn't destination, but ongoing commitment, daily decision to keep showing up, keep healing, keep transforming damage into something resembling hope. The brand had tried to define her. Instead, she'd redefined it, covered it with truth that served her rather than him, transformed ownership into autonomy, property into person, victim into survivor, into advocate. Some debts get paid in blood, others in miles traveled, lives touched. Stories told refusal to let evil have the last word. Marcus had paid his debt to Megan's memory through Sarah and Rosa and Anne and Becca and 80 others who'd passed through Foundation doors carrying trauma that needed witnessing. Now Sarah paid forward what couldn't be paid back, showing up for people who needed someone proving. Brands didn't define destiny, teaching that transformation was possible if you survived long enough to demand it. She kept driving toward sunset, toward work, toward future that remained uncertain, but finally felt like it belonged to her. Free.